All right, stand up, everybody. I'm a doctor. There's something called sitting disease, and you're all going to get it. Now, what I want you to do right now, I know you're all doing your little yoga stretches and the rest of it, but I want you to get a little hint of what it feels like to be hooked, hacked, and hijacked. Put your hands out in front of you. Now what I want you to do is just squeeze as hard as you can, both fists. Come on, I want to hear those fake nails popping. A little bit of blood. This is good. Does it hurt? Good. Now, just feel that tension almost. That's what it's like. Hooked, hacked, and hijacked. Now what I would like you to do is let open. Open up your hands. Just let them move a little bit. That's release. That's what it feels like to find that solution. Take your left hand, put it over your heart, your right hand over there. That's self-compassion. And that's what's going to make it sustainable. Feel good? One big stretch. Now sit down. We have absolutely no science to tell us how long you actually have to stand up and move around, so I just make it up as I go along. By doing so, I provoke science, because I provoke people. 10 minutes out of every hour, just get up and assume the vertical whenever you can and play. It's my little rule. What I'd like to do today is I want to take you on a journey. You're saying to yourself, addiction? Oh, that has nothing to do with me. That's just some medical condition, a disease entity. Au contraire. I'm going to be explaining why it has everything to do with you, because it's not what you really think it is. We have new science that involves not just addiction per se, but also epigenetics, which I'm also going to teach you about. How many of you know epigenetics, understand it? Start Googling it today. You know those little Google alerts? Epigenetics and psychology. It's extraordinary science, and you'll understand why it has everything to do with what you do. So, what am I going to be doing? The first thing I'm going to be doing is silencing that cell phone that just went off. Speaker's prerogative. You know, this is what addiction classically looks like. It's that horrible feeling you felt when the nails were popping. And it's classic. You see these classic signs. I want you to look at this very carefully, because this is what we as physicians and scientists have agreed upon in the DSM. Tolerance, withdrawal, loss of control, inability to stop, obsession and preoccupation. Want to know what that feels like? What that actually looks like?
I'm negative, I'm dark, and I want to do bad stuff. I want to hang out in this neighborhood alone. That's dangerous to hang out in this neighborhood alone up here, right? He wants to kill everything. He wants to kill me too. But I want to live my sober life. I don't want to die. I'm on the verge of dying because I'm a vicious alcoholic. And I've been, this is some interesting stuff. I haven't drank 2 drugs in 6 days. And for me, that's a miracle. I've been lying to everybody else to think I'm sober. I'm not. This is my 6th day. I'm never going to use again.
That's addiction in its classic form. You just heard a voice, in this case, Mike Tyson. And this, by the way, is about a month old. At the end of my talk, you'll be hearing another voice. It's a very futuristic voice. It's a brand new way of looking at all of this. So stay tuned. So you say addiction. Well, what is another way of being able to do this? Think about this. There's a brand new category that's called almost addiction from the wonderful Harvard faculty members Metcalf and Boyd. And this is Almost Addicted from their book. How many people actually fall within this category? A lot more than you think, and I'm going to tell you something, they're not going to let you know. Because you see, it's not just hooked, hacked, and hijacked. It's held back. They're going to hold back, and it's also going to hold them back from doing what Carol referred to earlier, to follow their dreams. Because they can't. These people fall outside any normal behavior, so they don't meet any criteria, so you write them off. And they write themselves off. They're already causing some problems, but they're not going to let you know. Many times. Why? Shame, blame, and guilt. Could be anything. And this also has the potential to progress. That means that they're on the launch pad, unless you grab them. And they're absolutely everywhere. Cupcakes, Vicodin, screens, and toxic stress. They're everywhere. Perhaps you saw that wonderful article in the Wall Street Journal a couple months ago about women and alcohol. Oh, the things you don't know. When I give many of these talks and I'm working with executives, you know how many times, because as a physician, they're more open to doing this, people come up to me and they say, oh, by the way, is it okay to do a bottle of wine every night? Really, every night. Let's do some math. There's a great website now for women. There's a wonderful article in the Wall Street Journal about women and alcohol, and the website was Women Who Need Wine. They have 650,000 followers. There's another one that has just as many followers, if not more, and that is, I need a glass of wine or I'm going to sell my children. It's a very active website. There's a Facebook, it goes on, it's ugly. And do we have a little issue here? Yeah, sure you do. There's a recent study of video gaming. Again, all falling outside the classic definitions of, as it were, addiction. And this study was done at the University of Missouri. What they actually found was that the mass majority of these people who are really hardcore video gamers are there doing it because of escapism. It's something in the addiction academics that's referred to as a psychic retreat. Now, all of us have psychic retreats. Having a little bad day. Right now, you might want to have one occasionally. Like, oh boy, and then off you go to, fantasy land. Now, psychic retreats are a great place to go visit every now and then. Addicts live there. They create their own world. And you remember the criteria I just showed you. Those criteria apply to them. And it's really very interesting. Many of them will give up personal responsibilities, not show up to work to do these things that they do, like video gaming, for instance. It doesn't fit the classic. And this is my argument, and this is my conjecture, my hypothesis. There's a very wide spectrum of addictive, hooked, hacked, and hijacked behaviors. Some fit the classic algorithms, but most don't. And they affect every single person you talk to, that you interact with. Every single person. So you have to deep dive a little bit. There's a reason why there's a hang-up here. Toxic stress from work. Why did you show up at work at 6 in the morning every day? What's up with that? No personal life? What happened to you? And just go a little bit deeper. What's going on? I have to be here. Why? And then go right down those criteria. And ask yourself, how dysfunctional is this person becoming because of this specifically? And then there's very strange behaviors. I have my iPhone here with the new iOS 7, which I'm still learning how to do. A study by Stanford researchers basically noted that many of their very elite undergraduates and graduates not only were very closely bonded with this technology, they actually patted it like a pet. And they were upset when they felt that the iPhone was being trumped by the iPad. They almost talked to them. It's like, it's okay, I just have to use the iPad for a moment. I know. Support groups are forming all across this country. We laugh, but there's something to this. When I show you the science, and my job today is not to teach you to become a neuroscientist. Instead, I'm going to give you visuals that I hope you never forget. And when you leave here, you'll say, OMG. I need a glass of wine. My hero in all of this is the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse, Dr. Nora Volkow, who is actually Leon Trotsky's great-granddaughter. What you're going to hear is a Russian accent with Spanish overtones, because she was born and raised in the home in Mexico where he was assassinated. An incredible family. She's a psychiatrist. She is a chocoholic. She's reed thin and has always been fascinated with the fact that chocolate called to her. Now that's interesting, and began her pursuit of understanding what this was all about back in 2000 at the Brookhaven Laboratory, about 8 years before she was named director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse. There are 17 institutes, 2 are headed by women. She's one of the most powerful scientists in the world. And lo and behold, with brand new technology, and that means PET scanning, positron emission tomography, as well as functional MRI, she laid the golden egg. She began to build the case for this, and this finally became popularized in this wonderful piece in 60 minutes.
If you can't stop eating, are you an addict? Just like someone hooked on heroin or cocaine?
Stay so free.
Dr. Nora Volkow, head of the National Institute of Drug Abuse, says you probably are.
There may be a common element in the loss of control that occurs with drug addiction and in the loss of control that occurs with compulsive overeaters. Which in a way is not surprising, because our brain did not develop all of these circuits for us to take drugs. It developed them to ensure that we did behaviors important for survival, like eating.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, there are only 2 reasons why you're here today. And they both revolve around the issue of reward. It's rewarding to be able to do well at work and all the rest of that, but please, I'm talking about 2 primal needs that revolve around reward, without which we would not have this nice conversation today. One is sex, one is food. Now, 50 Shades of Grey aside, sex is pretty much the same thing. You know, are we done yet? Food, not so much. So what ended up happening was, and as Dr. Volkow said so brilliantly, we started with 2 very primal reward needs, and things got a little gamished. Now, here's the way it works. The reward center in the brain responds quite nicely to pleasurable stimuli. An apple is wonderful, wouldn't you agree? A certain amount of dopamine, the brain neurotransmitter secreted by the reward center, is secreted. And you feel good. It links with its receptor and and you have that wonderful feeling. Then there's a Twinkie. Now, Twinkies are not food. They are science fair projects. There are 3 different kinds of petroleum and rock in those. Read the side label. If it looks like jet fuel, it is. These were specifically formulated to be able to hijack, as it were, the reward center, to give it uber reward, and to make an apple pale in comparison. An invulnerable individual, certainly not everyone, you cave to the crave. So we look at so many things that give us reward, and we've gotten confused, haven't we? It's so rewarding to get up and to be at work by 5:30 in the morning. When did that get rewarding? Because someone dangled a carrot, and they said, do that, and the boss will love you. You'll do so well. Follow the reward. Listen to people. Who are they being mentored by in this whole reward search? This lays down the path for their behaviors. I'm the chief lifestyle expert for WebMD's 90 million members. I coach a lot of folk. And you'd be amazed at the definitions of reward. Of course I'd get up and be at work by 5:30 for the following reasons, all of which are illogical. And this is why I can't seem to be able to find any time to meditate, to take care of myself, and whatever. But I have a great job. Where did that come from? It came from the laying down of pathways for different reward. The cupcake has become my symbol. It's been robbed. I've been flattered by people taking off with this. The National Geographic has a current issue with a cupcake on the cover, all about sugar. I think the cupcake pretty much says it. Cupcake is not a cake. It's just basically a purveyor of a bunch of frosting. I discovered this when I was a child. But one of the things we found looking at this, and again, I want you to just, I'm only using food as a metaphor here. We just happen to have had an investigator, Dr. Volkol, who decided to utilize food as the next step to understanding what all addictive processes look like. Because when she laid the golden egg, what she found was that whatever she found for food was true for drugs. What she found for drugs was true for food. And if we actually expand that, it'll be true to some degree or the other for most activities and substances and things, people, places, and things that we find that we're hooked, hacked, and hijacked over. Serge Ahmed, in a fabulous textbook, which was published blessedly a month before my consumer book, noted in his laboratory that there was no question that refined sugar was more addictive than cocaine or heroin. When this news leaked out finally into the consumer literature, of course the food industry was all over this, as well as the beverage industry, saying indeed this couldn't be true, but sorry, it was peer-reviewed research. And we've only affirmed this since that period of time. It's interesting when you look at this. Well, this has been followed now by a tsunami of now excellent and interesting references in this. The Food and Addiction textbook is for professionals primarily. And it has 66 chapters on everything from public policy to clinical and basic science, as well as psychology, genetics, and epigenetics. Michael Moss, who might have seen, is the Pulitzer Prize-winning author from the New York Times, who busted open the entire meat industry, decided to take on salt, sugar, and fat. And he was the one, if I culled it all down to one thing, who basically said, look, there's been a lot of thought that goes into this. When you grab some of those special treats out there, little science fair project, chip things, and all the rest of it, or as Michael Pollan would say, food-like products. Millions of dollars have gone into researching how to be able to achieve something called the bliss point. Somewhat akin to an orgasm in nutritional language. It's a bliss point. And what happens is, how fast can you achieve that bliss point? Meaning that from the moment it hits your mouth, you're off and running. And you feel that, aha, and there's a tsunami of dopamine being secreted by your reward center. And your executive function, all but shut off. Which is why you can't have just one. It's an excellent read if you want to understand some of the background. Fat Chance, obviously, by my wonderful colleague, Lustig. Even Mika Brzezinski from MSNBC decided to come out. And it's very important that you understand, look at her. People who have these issues are every single size. They just keep their torture to themselves. And, of course, I wrote the first consumer book. And it was very interesting. I was wondering whether or not I'd hit a chord out there when I launched it. And in 5 days, it became a New York Times bestseller. And this was the one common, because I collected this with my team, the one common comment. And that was, my God, I thought I was going out of my mind. Now we have the science. Thanks. Gives them a feeling of hope, which is a great gift on the overall. So then this was followed by a way to be able to credential food and addiction. And of course, you could put anything you want up there. It could be anything from, for instance, a video gaming addiction scale or all the rest of it. Again, it's all, I think, on a long, long spectrum, and what you'll see in the following years, most probably, is the ability to take new science as it's applied to the brain, and all of these particular activities, including gaming and looking at screens. And if you actually look at the Yale Food Scale, and if you actually just Google it, you can download the entire PDF, and that is all based upon DSM questions. You could have just filled in the blank for anything else. Could have been alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex. Now, here's where the fun started, and this is where Dr. Volkol really went to town. And what she found, for all intent and purposes, is that everything she did, when she studied food, suddenly rang very clearly with drugs. She was finding the same parallel paths. And this was very, very exciting, because there were two parts of the brain she was most interested in, and these are the two parts that you must be interested in. One is the reward center. Clearly, you want to be able to change behavior by offering appropriate, productive, healthy, well-being rewards. And at the same time, you want to be able to be armed and dangerous, locked and loaded. To be able to execute this, and that is where the prefrontal cortex comes in. So if you actually look at the diagram of how she had finally combined all of this in a manuscript that she had published in Biological Psychiatry, January of this year, what she was able to do was show that they follow the same path, drugs or any other substrate in food. Well, duh. Obviously, they both ignite the reward center. They ignite the reward center. But food is far more interesting. Drugs take a direct path to the reward center. Food, however, is queued up at multiple levels, from hormonal to, for instance, ghrelin and leptin. If you want to guarantee yourself problems, don't sleep well. Sleep deprivation, by definition, is highly correlated with girth. Leptin is a hormone that hangs out around your fat cells. Its major job in life is to be able to monitor fat fuel. Oh, she's a little low. Then it cues the brain, as you can see. And it cues the brain and the hypothalamus, which is command central. And it says, turn on ghrelin. Ghrelin is a hormone that exists in the fundus or the curvature of the stomach. And this will turn on an appetite from hell. Nothing will stop it. Not even an act of Congress, certainly not our current one. So, at a very primal level, this works beautifully. I'm hungry. Something better be turning on in my brain because I have to go out and forage and stay alive. When you don't get enough sleep, and I hope you ask about this, when you don't get enough sleep, both hormones become completely dysregulated. And as such, when you wake up in the morning after 3 hours of troubled sleep, when it comes to food and beverage, everything's bait. And then you wonder, it's an out-of-body experience. Why am I eating that macchiato, venti, nasty thing, along with 16 scones? This is weird. It's like, wow, I'm watching her do that. No, it's actually me. Because your mind and body have just basically disentangled. I mean, you're a mess. Guaranteed trouble with sleep deprivation. That's just one small, small piece of a very complex puzzle. Now, you keep that up, then you're going to be hyperexposing to hyperpalatables. What are the hyperpalatables? Hint, it's not tuna on a bed of greens that you run to when you're all stressed out at nighttime, is it? No. You're tired, you're beat up, you're homicidal. And instead, it's sort of a national menage a trois. You, Ben, and Jerry. Typically in bed, big spoon, pint. Who was the idiot who wrote 4 servings per pint? Seriously? Come on. Little perimenopausal, bad day, Law and Order marathon. We're ready to rock. Now, the hyperpalatables are very interesting. They are sugary, fatty, salty food combos. Sugary, fatty, salty food combos. And it's interesting. I mean, whatever the combo that you like is completely unique to you, of course. But the bottom line is, when you do that, a couple of things happen in your brain. The first thing that happens is you actually soothe yourself. Yes, it's an expensive anesthetic. For a short period of time, cortisol, stress hormone, actually decreases. So you're in that, I love Law and Order. You forget about all the idiots you had to deal with all day long. It's midnight. You're supposed to be asleep. Bag that. You have Ben and Jerry with you. And all is good. That's the good news. The bad news is it wears off in about 5 minutes. You wake up in the morning and you're just absolutely swimming in wrappers. What did I do last night? Shame, blame, and guilt. We're back to the same thing. But you did one other thing. You stimulated your reward center. Do you remember the Twinkie and the apple? In vulnerable brains with enough exposure, your reward center starts changing. 2 places, the reward center and the prefrontal cortex. This is a very, very simple diagram, no-brainer, nothing to have to memorize. Just remember, and this was from Volkohl's earliest work, when she was trying to figure this out, putting together all of her neuroimaging, and what she found out was the following. The control center, which is the prefrontal cortex and all of its interconnections, is basically out of the loop. You have a hyperdrive, literally hyperdrive, that's going on between the reward center, drive. Memory is cue. Memory is cue. Ooh, I remember that tasted good. Jamocha almond fudge. Video game. Ooh, that felt good. Where's my iPhone? And even weird things that are strange. How about that rotten relationship you have with your spouse? How come you haven't done something about it? Because it works for you. Right now. How about that job? How come you haven't done something about it? You want to make a change. Because it works for you right now. Somehow you got stuck in that circuit. Round and round and round you went, and executive function went out the window. What I'm going to show you next is a PET scan. This is a very special scan of the brain, and one of the things I want you to remember are just the visuals, so you never forget this again. This was the groundbreaking piece of science that Volkohl and her team were able to discover and literally change the science. Let me explain. In your brain, in the reward center, when you feel reward, dopamine is secreted. Dopamine can do nothing to make you feel good unless it links with its receptor. There are receptors all over the brain. Once it links with the receptor, then you have that, what a sunset, it's beautiful, feels so good. Whoa, Jimmy Choo shoes, 70% off. You didn't go for the sunset, so I had to do the Jimmy Choo thing. And it's all good. Now, what happens in a hijacked, hooked, and hacked brain when you've had exposure to either very toxic substances at high levels, alcohol, drugs, or the hyperpalatables? What happens in that brain? Over time, what ends up happening is a very primal instinct on the part of the brain. It says, whoa, we're getting uber reward, way above what someone who would normally experience pleasure have. It's not the Apple level, it's the Twinkie level. And the brain just keeps churning out more and more dopamine to try to keep up with this high level of sugary, fatty, salty stuff. Or it could be anything, the video game. I go back to any of this. It's a metaphor. And after a while, the brain says, whoa, overstimulation. Brain cannot handle this anymore. We must make changes. What's the first thing it does? Is it down-regulates the total number of receptors. It has to. These are called D2 receptors, or the dopamine receptors in the reward center. By doing so, guess what? You're going to have all the dopamine you want, but if it doesn't link with the receptor, you don't feel it. The brain thinks it's protecting you. It actually begins a vicious cycle of addiction, being hooked. Suddenly, one cupcake's not enough because you just took away all those receptors. Now I need 13 to just begin to feel where I'm coming from. This is where all that, now I get it. One video game's not enough. And by the way, if you ever wonder whether or not you yourself are hooked, hacked, and hijacked, look at a particular habit and see if you can do it. One day, and then the next day, not do it. See how it feels. So, we used the positron emission tomography, and we lit up the brain, but we did something interesting. Actually used a radionucleotide which would light up the dopamine as it hit the receptor. So the only way you could possibly see it light up, and it'll be an orange color, is when that receptor is linked. We took 3 people, normal. There's 1 normal person left in the United States. We used them for all of these experiments. This person is locked away in Leavenworth. It's very funny. I mean, you have no idea how bad it is. We can't seem to find any normal people out there. I still have no idea what normal means. But anyway, this person is called normal. And then we have a cocaine abuser and someone who has been fully validated as a food addict. And I could have continued with sex, gambling, video, whatever, back and forth. And lo and behold, this is what we found. In the normal person, you see it all lit up with the orange. We basically did something very pleasurable. We said, oh, look at the very beautiful sunset. Isn't that just something that they liked that was fairly, straightforward. And boom, dopamine came out. It linked with the receptors, and that's one happy camper. Look at the cocaine and the person who is food addicted. Look in their reward center. There's not a whole lot going on, is there? Very, very, very little orange, which means that there were very, very few dopamine receptors. There's some in there, but not much. They've been downregulated. They have been downregulated. My hypothesis is that in the extreme forms, as you see in drug addiction as well as in food addiction, fine, we see this. I'll put money on it that when we really start deep diving into a whole lot of other habits, we'll see some variation on the theme now that we can actually measure this. This basically was groundbreaking. Seeing those 2 PET scans with the cocaine abuser as well as the food addict as indistinguishable basically convinced Volkol that there was no question that we're talking about a common circuit here, not different entities, but a common circuit, parallel pathways into the reward center. Don't let me forget to tell you now, then, about the prefrontal cortex. We kept saying, well, gosh, if this is going on the reward center, clearly, I'm simplifying this big time. These are massively integrated and interconnected brain regions and networks. However, what we did find across the board, and we found this with food addiction, we found this with all kinds of substrate addiction, and that is that there is actual damage, organic damage and impairment to the prefrontal cortex, as you can see by the decreased amount of glucose metabolism seen in the orbital frontal cortex of the abuser, which basically then helped us understand why you couldn't just walk up to an alcoholic or someone who had a true, as it were, validated addiction and say, oh, for God's sake, just use more willpower. That'd be tantamount to asking someone to run a 5K on 2 broken legs. Can't do that. This is why, if you look at things like many of the kinds of habits and conditions and behaviors you see on a day-by-day basis as coaches, it's so difficult to break sometimes. Where is that executive function when you need it? You have to understand that now, do you remember Mike Tyson tapping his head? Used to be a black box. It isn't anymore. We have ways to peer into the brain. We can tell real time what's going on in your brain. Do we have answers for every? Of course not. We barely touch the surface. But no longer is it a black box. We can actually see organic changes, damage and impairment. We can also watch this as a healing process as well, because of course I wouldn't tell you all these downer things without telling you that indeed this does heal itself. There's no question that it heals itself, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. For that matter, right now, PET scanning's going to be used to be able to determine who are the bingers and who aren't. Why do we need this? Drugs, drugs, and more drugs. We want to be able to find out if there's any way to be able to intercede in those people who are at the highest levels of risk for things like binge eating, because we see the same kinds of problems with them as well. Let's talk about cues. This was from O'Hare Airport. I couldn't help myself. Always the scientist. So I was walking through the airport. Okay, I'll be honest. I was on my 13th delay that day, and they changed the gate 6 times. So I was wandering the halls, praying to God I'd ever get home. And I saw a sign. It was just amazing. And I passed this on my way to figure out what the sign was about. And the sign was this big sign that says, "Can you smell it? Can you see it? Feels so good." I thought, damn, massage parlor. What do we got going here? You know, and obviously everyone was, to everyone's point this morning, curious. What's going on? And then it said at the bottom, "Come further, follow us." So like a little sheeple, I went right along with everybody else. And there was another sign about 10 feet away. It said, "So good, tastes so good, melts in your mouth. So much energy." It just went on and on. I thought, dear God, where are we going here? Could be pretty interesting, you know. And then I kept going and going. And then it says, "Come around the corner. We're waiting for you." Oh, okay. Now I'm quickening up the pace. It was Starbucks. And there was a line, seriously, as long as you can see. They all just followed like this. Oh, okay. All right, feels good. You know, and back and forth. There wasn't a pastry to be found. The whole place was empty out. But it was very effective. On my way, of course, I hit one of those W.H. Smith places, and I couldn't help but take a picture of this. This was literally floor to ceiling. These are flight bites. There's no whole food here involved. This is all little nasty things. But they're all there as hyperpalatables to light it up. After all, think about it. You're in an airport. How you feeling? Stressed? There's a reason why stress spelled backwards is desserts. Great science is born. So what we actually did was we actually looked at food cues in the brain, and I was talking to Carol last night, and this sort of explained it all. Carol was saying that, you know, it's the funniest thing. You know, I thought about this one cookie. This cookie was just absolutely, I was obsessed with this cookie. Wanted this one kind of cookie. I'd had it before. She had memory. I'd had it before. I wanted it again. And I had to wait a long time to finally get it. And I finally had the cookie. It was a real bummer. Because, you know, to be perfectly blunt with you, it wasn't that good. I mean, it was okay. It wasn't that good. I mean, it was all right. But why was I all, you know, worked up about it? Ah, the power of cues. And there it is. Guess what Volkov found? Volkov found that if you actually looked at the secretion of dopamine in the reward center of the brain, that it was the cue that caused the tsunami of dopamine secretion, not the consumption. And after a while, I'm going to be honest with you, perchance you've been there yourself. Do you ever notice that when you really feel kind of hooked on something, that when you actually finally get around to, as it were, consuming it, it's not that much fun? That it was the anticipation that really got you going more than anything else. See, we can use this to our betterment in a more productive way. But in the science, what we found was that when they were queued up, they wanted it. And here's the thing. Once you were in full-on, on the extreme end, addictive mode like a Mike Tyson, guess what? The only reason why he ever consumed any of that was not for pleasure, but it was to relieve the pain of not having it. And so you see, there's another piece of this whole metaphor. All right, so what do we do with all of this stuff? What we want is we want a multi-prong approach. And aren't these all the things you do all day long anyway? Decrease the rewarding properties of the problem reinforcer, enhancing the rewarding properties of better ones, promote new habits to substitute for the old ones, and to strengthen the inhibitory, control. Isn't that what you do all day long? Of course it is. It's funny how all of this basically segues so smoothly with where you are. What I'm doing is I'm expanding your mind to think, wow, there's really some organic changes taking place in people who have developed lifestyle habits over time and thought processes that have gotten them into all kinds of trouble, and that we need to be able to heal this. Heal, 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 heal. There we are. Heal. We're healing. We need to be able to heal this to be able to make any kind of significant progress. So how do we do that? Well, one of the things you've got to keep in mind, and that is scope of service. Many, many people who are already pretty much on their way to being hooked, hacked, and hijacked may also have other comorbidities. And you can see that in people who do have issues with addictive behaviors, have mood disorders, anxiety disorders, PTSD, and eating disorders. It's a higher prevalence overall, ergo, many of these people really do need to be able to deep dive with a therapist, for instance, and to be able to get to trauma, to be able to get to places that are very painful, hard to reach. Your job is to help guide and support that process and to work as a tag team. And again, there are so many different psychological interventions. One of your main jobs is to be able to identify if this exists in the first place, and to be able to have that person trust you enough to discuss it, to begin to say, I think I really do have an issue here. How do I follow my trail of dreams? Maybe I'll park my tears with a therapist somewhere, but how can you help me, guide me, to even get the help that I actually need? Many people don't do that. They just log on to women who need wine. Now, this is interesting. With the stress and trauma and the rest of it, one of the things I want you to look at is that word epigenetic influence. Because this is something that is very kernel to what you do. In epigenetics, I'm going to explain very, very simply how this is pertinent to what you do. And by the way, one of the best summaries of this is in a very simple little article that you could Google called DNA is Not Destiny. Of course, I have spent a lot of time looking at this, and epigenetics is very kernel to my current research. And in my book, The Hunger Fix, I make a big deal about it for the obvious reason. We used to think when you were born, you have genes, and these genes, for all intents and purposes, were permanently expressing one particular thing, each one of them. So if you had a vulnerability toward heart disease, oh well, there you go. And hopefully you'll be able to dampen that somewhat with your lifestyle. But we had no idea if we could really make significant alterations here. It was that black box thing again. So this is what we found. We found that all you had to do, and this is a brilliant, brilliant science that was just emerged in 2007 with Randy Girdle at Duke University. We found was that every thought you have, every mouthful you take, and every step you take or don't take affects how that gene speaks to the rest of the body. It just sits there with potential. So is it going to be Republican, Democrat, Tea Party? Oh, there's Ted Cruz. And what's it going to be? How's it going to speak? And then we have these wonderful proteins called histones, and they just hang around outside the gene, and they basically monitor everything you do. She's reaching for an apple. That is absolutely fantastic. The histones are the speechwriters, and they will communicate with that gene and say, it's an apple moment. We're going to augment the immune system. We're going to float through beautiful phytonutrients and micronutrients to be able to help augment health and well-being in that particular person. Oh no, she's reaching for a ho-ho. This is bad. All right? The histones are in ho-ho mode now. It's like, ingested science fair project. Destroy, erode immune system. float through allergens so the whole body can light up and get inflamed. Like, what is that coming through us? Your choice. Do you see how empowering that is? So we decided to play with that a little bit. And what you'll see then is when we're actually working with something like coaching the brain through healthy lifestyle habits, which include everything from meditation to eating leafy greens and fruits and vegetables, to doing more physical activity. I notice I never say the E word. I said physical activity, assuming the vertical, right? That, guess what you do? You change gene expression. If you have the most lethal gene on the planet for obesity, called the FTO gene, if you did nothing more than walk every day for half an hour to 45 minutes, I didn't say Olympic race walking, I said walking, at a moderate pace, and you did this for 6 months, you would dampen the gene, something we call methylation, you would dampen the gene by 40%. You are no longer condemned to being 100, 150 pounds over average weight. Now, can you imagine what would happen if I threw in just a little meditation, a little eating of the leafy greens? Then I'm well over 50%. We've already established this. Now, when we come to the leafy greens, when people are saying, well, I want to be a leader, I want to be coached well, I want to take care of why are you talking to me about stupid things like leafy greens? Well, here's the way it goes, okay? The way it goes is, you don't call them leafy greens anymore, so last year. So what we do now is we call them methyl donors. So you go to Whole Foods, you go, oh my God, look at these gorgeous methyl donors. I'll have that and that and that and that. Actually, it's all the fruits and vegetables, but I use the leafy greens because they're so incredibly replete with this. Hint, kale. Kale is one of the richest of all, okay? And what we find when you do that is you methylate the gene. What that means is the gene's sitting there saying, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, bad things. And then in comes that leafy green, methylates, slaps right out on it. And you keep doing that enough times, you're really affecting that, what we call the epigenome. And after a while, you have sustainable change. How cool is that? And all you did was you had a leafy green. Or you took that walk. And then the final piece to it is meditation. Okay? How many of you meditate? Don't lie. Yeah, wrong group to ask this question. Did it with the American College of Surgeons once, and nobody raised their hand. It's okay. They're coming along. It just takes a while. It's gradual change. Patience. No, but seriously, I don't know if you know this, but this is one of the hottest things on the planet. And that is that through meditation, through nutrition, through the physical activity, and all the rest of it, what we have been able to find is that we can now measure, just like your blood pressure, just like any of the blood tests that we do, glucose and all the rest of it, cholesterol, we can actually measure the epigenetic changes taking place. So we find a whole host of genes that we want to look at: inflammation, heart disease, diabetes. We see you, in the beginning of this particular little program that we're going to be doing, and then at some point time later on, we're actually able to measure them all over again. Guess what we find? Methylation. And I also want to let you know, this does not take 9 years. If you meditate, you methylate. Oh my God, that rhymes. Meg, let me remember that one. That was a good one. When you meditate, you methylate. And we can actually see it within minutes. That's how powerful that is. That's why this is so terribly important. So if you have an addictive urge, if you have an addictive vulnerability, if you're hooked, hacked, and hijacked, guess what? One of the most important things of all is for you to be able to utilize your own genes to do this well. Your own genes. And that's one of the major solutions. All right. We're bringing this through. I've always used a three-prong approach. It's mind, mouth, and muscle. I use alliteration because as I get older, I can then remember it. Mind, mouth, and muscle. It's very straightforward. I want you to always remember this beautiful, beautiful quote from George Leonard. If you have not read his book Mastery, please do. It's blessedly small, short, and to the point. And what it really says is the master is anyone who stays on the path, who falls, who fails, who does whatever, time and time and time again, but always picks themselves up and keeps it going. Thus, sustainable recovery for whomever, however, whenever. And that is the mission statement here. By the way, my patients love this, and I know mastery's been mentioned before earlier this morning. I love that word, mastery. Mastery is also a very humble word, too. And when you're looking at the mind, it's exactly what I said to you before, precisely what I said to you before, except for something interesting. Look, where it says tiger in the cage, drug versus food, you could have filled in anything, not just food. It could have been anything, videotaping, rotten marriage, whatever you're hooked, hacked, and hijacked on. It doesn't matter. It's just an order of magnitude different. But there's one issue that makes this very remarkably unique, and that is when it comes to a drug, right? When it comes to a drug, you don't need it. So you're either on it or you're off it. It's not needed for survival. So methamphetamine, cocaine, all the rest of it, Adderall, Xanax, you don't need it for survival. So you could be easily away from it in no time at all. Goodbye. So you take that tiger, you put him in the cage, you lock that cage, throw away the key. Not so much with all of these other habits. What you actually have yourself doing is walking over to the cage, unlocking it a number of times a day. The question is, can you manage the tiger? And that's where the prefrontal cortex comes in. This is one of the most important things you could possibly do. Do everything in your power to strengthen the prefrontal cortex, to strengthen its ability to help you maintain vigilance, mindfulness, attention, organization, strategy, and to rein in the 3 I's: impulsivity, impatience, and irritability. So that's what the mind, that's the whole goal of working with the mind. And all the healthy habits help you do this, to dampen down, so that you can follow that trail of dreams. And this is something I love. Remember, I go back to Mike Tyson tapping his head. I loved it, and that's why I actually showed it to you. I do something with many of my patients that's kind of fun. And what I do is I told them about this beautiful quote from Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there's a space, and the space is our power to choose. And then in that response lies our growth and our freedom. And what happens classically, especially in this 24/7 go, 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 go world, where suddenly executive function flies out the window, I ask people to just do one thing. Just tap your forehead. That's all. Prefrontal cortex is sitting right there. It reminds you. And what I do is, it's a pause button. Pause. One of my patients said she stopped doing that because people thought she was Catholic, or, she was doing. So she started hitting her wrist. She just did the little wrist thing. And it reminded her, oh, stop, pause. I have power here. I can do this. And in that space, here's that space, that pause, I'm going to make a powerful response. I'm going to own this piece. It's very difficult for people to do this who have had any kind of hooked, hacked, and hijacked behavioral template. And then, with the mouth, I'm not going to dwell on this. It's very straightforward. When Meg and I do our track session, we're going to dive into this much deeply. But one of the things, all I can tell you is greens, and kale, methyl donors. And in the muscle, here's something you're going to love. Who wants a bigger brain? Okay, excuse me. Who wants a bigger brain? Thank you. All right. I've gone Madison Avenue with all my books and the rest of it. When you talk about health, it's lethally boring. Seriously, I could kill people with talking like this. So instead, you have to add a little medutainment to it. So when I ask about that, I'm not kidding you around. Did you know that if you want a better prefrontal cortex, that if you actually want to grow more mass, you just do physical activity, because what does it stimulate? Neurogenesis, of course. Neurogenesis has been found to occur in people of all ages. A recent study of 70-year-olds who did nothing more than walk. They measured their hippocampal size, and they increased by 5% over the course of 6 months. And so did their cognitive ability and memory. We like that. Big brain, small waist. That means you're making smarter decisions. It's just a simple, clippy way of doing that. You with me? So you want that neurogenesis. So I'm stimulating my brain cells right and left up here, right? Growing that big brain, and you want that. It also helps heal the prefrontal cortex after all it's been through, and you saw what happened. You want that to heal. And by the way, the dopamine receptors come back. But they'll come back to whatever your normal was, whatever that was. But they do come back. Hint, they don't come back right away. They start coming back, but you've got millions and millions of them to make up for if you've downregulated at all. So you have to be exquisitely patient with this process. None of this, in 4 weeks, she was cured. Don't believe it. In 6 weeks, the 6-week whatever plan, bag it. Let's start talking a year. I mean, it keeps going. But one of the things that's so terribly important is to be building up that prefrontal cortex vigilance and mindfulness immediately to be able to get this healing process on the road. So I promised you a second voice. This is the second voice. She's a 50-year-old Washington lawyer, somewhat redundant. Who's now in her 8th month. And instead of saying, hi, I'm so good, everything's just wonderful back, this is the new way and the new voice.
Hi, I'm a food addict. I've detoxed and now I'm in recovery. And I'm happy to say my dopamine receptors are coming back.
Thank you very much.